of you here, out of interest, are frightened of flying? Any hands up? Oh, there's a few. Of you, how many of you actually don't go flying? Because you're scared of flying. Okay, I'm not scared of flying, I'm scared of crashing. So that's one thing to bear in mind, okay? Yeah. Okay, to be fair, when you think about it, does everybody know the double-decker Airbus 380? Emirates is very famous, most of the airlines have got it. The big double-decker bus? Everybody sort of familiar with that one? That's roughly 500,000 kilograms. 500,000 kilograms of metal, fuel, passengers, luggage, etc. And when you think about that, how on earth does something like that get airborne? That's roughly, bearing in mind we're talking about elephants, it's roughly 50 double-decker red buses. How does something like that get airborne? Now, what I'm going to talk to you in a minute is the whole context of how an aircraft does get airborne. Don't worry, I'm not going to go too deep into the aerodynamics of it, but I'm going to use that as a model and a metaphor to help business and business owners understand how, as a business grows, that a simple model like this helps them think about how it can be much easier to grow with less hassle, etc. But most people will know me from my playing days. And yes, I do look a lot younger, fitter, slimmer, and probably can run a lot faster in those days. That was my rugby days. Now, most people will know me from rugby, but at the time, this is a long time ago, 84 to 96, bless him, Luke, who was on earlier on, wasn't even born then, but there you go. That wasn't my day job. My day job was, as just been mentioned, I was a pilot in the Royal Air Force. I've been in the Air Force for 18 years. I've got 3,000 flying hours during that time. And I did the two together. So I was commissioned in the Royal Air Force in 1983, and I played my first game for England in 1984. The best way of describing it is my day job was I was whizzing around, flying jets and flying low level for the Royal Air Force, and my hobby was playing rugby for England. That's what it was like in those days. Now, the game is professional nowadays, etc. Now, I retired in 1999 from all rugby, retired from England in 96. And in 2001, I left the Air Force after serving 18 years, and that's when I set off into the corporate and into the consultancy world. And so the last 21 years, it's 21 years since I've been out, I've been dealing with companies as a consultant, teams, passionate about teams, very passionate about teams, and talking about how you help teams work together to deliver on the strategy. So, pilots, aerodynamics, very simple, thumbnail sketch, give you an idea, you can all become qualified pilots overnight. So, there's a Hawk. I used to fly the Hawk 4.5 years. Basically, it's, everybody knows here, they live in Lincoln. Where's the nearest Hawk station? Scampton. They've got red ones there, okay? One less, because I went out a bird strike the other day. But it's basically the same aircraft I flew here, not painted red. So, most of you will know the 4 elements and factors that make up aerodynamics. I'm going to go through it. I'm not going to ask a quiz. Don't worry, I'm not going to pounce on you. But there are 4, and once I name the 4 words, you'll recognize them, even though you don't remember them specifically in this model. So, you have the mass of the aircraft. You've got the thrust that gets the whole thing moving. You've got to overcome the drag. If you get all those things in the right order, you create lift. If you think about that big Airbus, it weighs 500,000 kilograms. You've got to put the engines up to get enough thrust to get the whole thing moving. Once it gets moving and you get faster and faster, it creates lift over the wings to overcome the drag. It gets airborne. It's as simple as that. Or fingers crossed, you hope so. So let's talk in a bit more detail about the lift and drag, which is what I'm going to talk about in more detail. So most of you here will have been in a car when you're a kid, or most of you got soft-top cabriolets or something like that, and you stick your hand out the window. We've all done that. Going along, put your hand up in the air, and you feel that pressure against your palm. You put your hand flat like this, and you do a bit of snake porpoising and that sort of stuff. I'm sure you've done all that, yes? I see people nodding their heads. The rest of you wondering what the hell I'm talking about. But those you put your hand in and you feel the pressure, that's the drag. So you can imagine that's like a barn door. You feel like that, obviously it's cutting through the wind. So that's the drag effect, okay? So what about lift? So there's a cross-section of a wing. And you'll notice that it's a bit more curved on top and flat underneath. And basically the principle in very simplistic terms is an air molecules will hit the front, get to the back at the same time, but the ones going over the top will take longer have to speed up to get to the end at the same time as the one underneath. That differential of speed creates a low pressure above the wing. And the thing about nature, it abhors vacuum and it hates discrepancies. So what it'll do, it tries to fill the vacuum, recreate the low pressure. So it generates lift. That's the very simplistic. There you are. You're now expert pilots. Okay? So what has that got to do with trying to use that as a metaphor for a business? So if we take the same model there, you've got the same words there still: mass, drag, lift, and thrust. So let's change those into a context of a business, especially when it's growing. So in the context of mass, think of that as a size of a business. How many people are in it? How many office buildings? Where are you around the country? What about drag? What creates drag as you get more and more people in the business is complexity. The more people, the more different companies, the more different locations, it creates complexity. How do you overcome and train that lift is what we call commercial awareness. The greater you are aware of what you're trying to do as a business, that creates lift in trying to generate how business moves forward. And thrust, fundamentally, if you can all work together as a team and teams with other teams in an organization, that teamwork will propel you and thrust that business forward. So that's in simplicity. I've taken the model from aerodynamics into the lift model from business. And so if you think about the office as you grow, as you get bigger and bigger, and you have more and more office buildings and more people, you know, with those sort of situations, you eventually get to a situation where potentially you have more drag. I suspect anybody in here who's worked in large organizations will know what I mean. The more people, it just seems things take a little bit longer. Things always seem to be more complicated than they need to be, okay? So I'll run through a few drag sort of scenarios here. So 3 people, 3 lines of communication, very simple. What's interesting though, as you add an extra person each time, look and see how much more lines of communication there are. It actually starts growing exponentially. And that gives you an idea. This goes up to 14. Imagine you grow a business to 50 to 100. How many potential lines of communication there are? That creates complexity. One of the things, when you grow bigger, the more people. You can't have one boss looking after 100 people. You need to have levels and layers of management. The thing is, as you create layers of management, you are devolving responsibility to your managers and leaders to run the business for you. But as each time you put a layer of management in, it creates complexity. So there's another way of creating drag. And then finally, when you start out, you've got a very simple spreadsheet, and that's all we do. You get a bit bigger, you add a bit more onto the spreadsheet. You get a bit bigger, you add a second sheet onto the spreadsheet. You start doing other systems. You do some performers, you do some forms. You add a bit more until you get bigger and bigger, and you can see with that graph over time, what started out simply as a very simple A to B process, after a while becomes not so simple A to B. And actually, this complexity can be a real serious killer for businesses. So how can we overcome this? How can we avoid that drag? How do we avoid that thing from slowing us going as effectively and efficiently as possible? The first thing to do is make sure that your communication is of a quality nature. I always challenge people to think about, when I say effective comms, I don't mean more, I mean better, okay? Effective comms. Secondly, management levels and clarity management, making sure that all your leaders and managers have got the skill to lead and manage, as well as understand how they understand what the strategy is and how they communicate it through the rest of the business, so everybody understands what we're trying to do. And secondly, keep your systems and processes as simple as possible. Some organizations I go into, they have 3 or 4 different processes for doing the same job in a company of 100 people. That's going to cause problems. So there's the sort of things you've got to think about when you overcome the drag. And so from this perspective, what you're trying to achieve is actually to try and create more lift. Overcome the drag, but also generate lift. If you can generate lift and you can make sure that your lift is greater than your drag, it generates growth. Fundamentally, that's what's happening to the aircraft on the runway. All you're trying to do is make sure there's enough thrust going through the engines to create enough lift on the wings to overcome the weight and the drag of the aircraft, and it literally gets airborne like magic. So how to generate lift? I would love to do this. If anybody says, what's that superpower thing you'd like to have? I would be Superman. I would love to fly. Up, up and away, and I'll be off. That would be my absolute dream. So in generating lift, what you're going to do is make sure everybody understands what your common purpose is, both in the context of as an individual, but as a team as well, within your organizations. Secondly, you need to make sure your people are talented. You need to develop them. You need to train them. You need to get them to understand what they need to do and have the skill sets to do it. Thirdly, make sure all your processes are aligned. As I said before, there are 3 or 4 different types of processes I can sometimes find in an organization doing the same thing. If you get all those 3 things, which sounds very simple when I write it on there, but you'll be surprised in most organizations, I suspect, without being able to see all your faces, that I suspect you can think of many, many situations where these aren't being done in your organizations, if at all. If you get these 3 things as right as possible, you start generating lift. And that fundamentally is the model. That's it. How do we become aware of our drag? How do we try and make sure we create lift? The more lift we can create and overcoming the drag, we generate growth. And so, overcome your drag. Work out ways of doing that. How do you create lift? And in fact, when I've been practicing this with Katie and Richard and speaking to all the rest of the colleagues that we've been doing this peer group, some have mentioned the whole context about, I can use this model in another way, not about my business, but about something else. Do it, there's no reason why not. How do you overcome drag if you've got any drag in whatever you're doing? How do I create lift? And from a business perspective, what I'm trying to do is to overcome the drag, create lift, so that I enable my organization to fly higher and faster with less effort. Thank you very much.